The global crisis unfolding before us is one that we cannot ignore: the devastating attacks on children by the group known as Allines. As horrifying as it may sound, the reality is that countless children around the world are facing unimaginable suffering due to these attacks, and the scope of this crisis continues to grow. It is a crisis that transcends borders, affecting children from different countries, cultures, and backgrounds. The innocent faces of children are being marked by trauma, violence, and displacement, all at the hands of forces that show no regard for their safety or well-being. It is crucial that we take a moment to fully understand the severity of this situation, as the future of these children is on the line. Children, by their very nature, are the most vulnerable members of society. They rely on adults for protection, guidance, and love. Unfortunately, many children around the world have had that sense of safety violently stripped away by these attacks. The group known as Allines, whether they are a militant organization or a political entity, have systematically targeted children, causing not only immediate harm but also setting the stage for long-lasting repercussions that will echo for generations. The scale of this assault is staggering. It is not limited to a few isolated incidents or a specific region. It spans continents, affecting areas where conflict, poverty, and instability already make life difficult for children. The attacks are happening in regions already struggling to provide even the most basic needs, and now they are compounded by the violence inflicted upon the very children who should be shielded from harm. When we speak of a crisis, it is often easy to think of a distant issue that does not touch us personally. But the truth is, these attacks on children are part of a global reality that should concern everyone, regardless of where they live. The Allines' relentless assault on children reveals the utter disregard for human life and highlights the failure of international systems to protect the most vulnerable. The children caught in the crossfire are not just statistics. They are real lives, each with their own dreams, hopes, and potential, which are now being erased before they have the chance to grow. Every child affected by these attacks represents a lost future, a lost opportunity for a better world. The Allines' attacks on children go beyond physical violence. These attacks often involve more than just immediate harm. They also result in severe long-term consequences. Children who survive these assaults are often left with deep psychological scars that are not easily healed. The emotional trauma that these children endure can have a lifelong impact on their mental health, shaping their futures in ways we cannot fully comprehend. The loss of family members, the destruction of homes, and the loss of a sense of security can leave children emotionally and psychologically shattered. Many of these children are left to face the world alone, without the support systems they need to rebuild their lives. These attacks on children are not just crimes against individuals. They are crimes against humanity, and they have a ripple effect that can be felt across generations. In addition to the psychological toll, the attacks on children by Allines also disrupt their education, health, and basic rights. In regions affected by conflict and instability, schools are often targeted or destroyed, leaving children without access to the education they need to break free from the cycle of poverty and violence. In some cases, children are abducted and forced to become soldiers, while others are denied access to the most basic forms of health care. The destruction of essential services, like hospitals and schools, only serves to deepen the crisis, making it even harder for these children to rebuild their lives after the attacks. Without access to education, healthcare, or a safe environment, the chances of these children ever leading a normal life are slim. This situation calls for immediate intervention, yet the international response has often been slow and inadequate. The most painful part of this crisis is the silence that often surrounds it. While the world is quick to condemn the atrocities of war, the suffering of children often gets lost in the larger political and military narratives. The focus shifts to the larger powers at play, and the voices of the children who bear the brunt of the violence are drowned out. This silence is not just an absence of words. It is a failure to recognize the humanity of the children affected. These children are not merely collateral damage in a larger conflict. They are individuals with the right to live in peace, with the right to dream and grow without fear. Yet, as the Allines attacks continue, these children's futures are being ripped apart, and their rights are being ignored. Despite the overwhelming scale of the crisis, there is hope. There are countless organizations, humanitarian workers, and activists who are tirelessly working to provide aid and support to these children. However, the efforts of these individuals and groups are often hampered by political complexities, limited resources, and the sheer scale of the crisis. The international community must do more to support these efforts and hold those responsible for these attacks accountable. It is not enough to simply offer words of sympathy. Concrete actions must be taken to ensure the protection of children, to provide them with the care and resources they need to heal, and to prevent further harm. The Allines attack on children is a reminder of the fragility of peace and the importance of protecting the most vulnerable members of society. We must not allow these children to be forgotten. The crisis is not just a regional issue. It is a global issue that demands the attention and action of every country and individual. It is time to come together to ensure that the children caught in this devastating conflict are given the opportunity to rebuild their lives and to create a future free from violence and fear. The world must not stand by in silence while innocent children suffer. It is time for action, and it is time for us all to stand up and say, enough. The nature of the attacks on children by Allines is as brutal as it is heart-wrenching. These assaults are not only physical but psychological, emotional, and social, creating a situation where children are exposed to unimaginable horrors, leaving scars that will last a lifetime. Allines, whether a militant group or another form of organized violence, have repeatedly targeted the most defenseless members of society. These attacks take many forms, and each one carries its own deep consequences for the children who suffer them. The brutality is not limited to one particular region or type of attack, but instead spans a wide variety of violent tactics aimed at children, all of which leave them vulnerable and broken. One of the most horrific forms of attack is the physical violence directed specifically at children. Bombings, shootings, and assaults have become a grim reality for many young people caught in areas controlled or attacked by Allines. These children, often playing, studying, or simply trying to survive, find themselves in the direct path of violent forces that show no mercy. Whether it's airstrikes, shelling, or street violence, children are often killed or injured, their lives cut short or changed forever in an instant. The trauma from such experiences is unfathomable. Children who survive these attacks may endure long-term physical injuries, often requiring years of medical care. Yet, the emotional scars left by such violence are even more profound. These children are not just left with visible wounds. They are left with a deep sense of fear and helplessness that can hinder their growth for years to come. No child should be subjected to the kind of violence that strips away their innocence and robs them of their sense of security in the world. Beyond physical harm, many children find themselves displaced from their homes and families as a direct result of Allines' actions. Forced displacement is one of the most devastating consequences of the attacks on children. Families are torn apart as children are separated from their parents, either due to death, kidnapping, or being forced to flee. The destruction of homes and entire neighborhoods forces children to live in makeshift shelters or refugee camps, where conditions are often overcrowded, unsanitary, and unsafe. In these environments, children are left without the stability and safety they desperately need. Worse yet, many of these children are left to fend for themselves in a world they no longer understand. The emotional and psychological toll on a child who has lost their home and everything they once knew is profound. The sense of normalcy and security is shattered, and the future seems uncertain as these children often struggle to find a way to rebuild their lives in a hostile and unfamiliar environment. In some cases, children become direct targets for recruitment into armed groups or are subjected to sexual exploitation. Allines have been known to abduct children and force them into becoming soldiers or fighters. This is a horrifying violation of their basic rights, as young people are coerced into participating in conflicts they don't understand, often exposed to violence and trauma that forever alters the course of their lives. These children are robbed of their childhoods, pushed into the horrors of war, and forced to carry out acts of violence. Many of these children are given no choice but to follow orders, often facing dire consequences if they resist. The emotional and mental toll of these experiences is immense. These children often suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, depression, and other mental health challenges. The trauma from such experiences doesn't simply disappear, it stays with them, making it incredibly difficult to reintegrate into society when the violence is over. Equally alarming is the psychological violence these children experience, even if they are not directly physically harmed. The constant fear, uncertainty, and disruption to their lives cause deep mental scars. Children who are exposed to the sounds of explosions, the sight of destruction, or the loss of their families often experience severe anxiety and depression. These young minds, still in the process of development, are forever altered by the stress and trauma that comes from living through such extreme conditions. They may struggle to sleep, suffer from nightmares, or develop an intense fear of returning to their homes or communities. Many children become withdrawn, and some lose the ability to trust others, as their lives are shaped by violence and betrayal. These children often grow up with a sense of hopelessness, and their prospects for a future free from fear and uncertainty diminish with each passing day. Furthermore, the attacks on children by Allines contribute to a severe disruption of education. Education is often one of the first casualties of conflict. Schools are bombed, destroyed, or taken over by military groups, leaving children without access to the education they need to build a better future. This is particularly damaging for children, who rely on schooling not only for knowledge, but also for a sense of stability and routine. School is where children build friendships, form a sense of community, and begin to imagine a future beyond the violence around them. When schools are attacked, these critical opportunities for development are stripped away. Children who should be in classrooms learning are left without an education, and this lack of opportunity can trap them in cycles of poverty and violence for the rest of their lives. Many young people are also forced to work or take on responsibilities far beyond their years, further depriving them of the chance to learn and grow in a safe and supportive environment. These attacks on children by Allines have far-reaching consequences, extending far beyond the immediate harm caused to the children themselves. The effects ripple through entire communities, creating long-lasting instability and perpetuating cycles of violence and suffering. The psychological and emotional damage to these children often prevents them from becoming productive members of society in the future. When large numbers of children are subjected to violence, the future of the entire region is at risk, as the next generation of leaders, workers, and caregivers are often left broken, lost, or abandoned. These children represent the future, and yet their futures are being stolen by those who perpetuate violence. The children who are caught in the crossfire of these attacks are not mere statistics. They are the future of our world, and their suffering is a tragedy that should not be ignored. The Allines attacks are not only tearing apart families and communities, they are destroying the very fabric of societies, robbing children of the chance to grow up in a world of peace, security, and opportunity. If we allow these attacks to continue unchecked, we risk losing an entire generation to violence, trauma, and despair. These children need our attention, our protection, and our action, as the scale of this crisis is too great to ignore. The time to act is now. The humanitarian crisis caused by Allines' attacks on children is nothing short of catastrophic. The consequences of these attacks extend far beyond the immediate physical harm inflicted on the young victims. The long-term damage ripples through entire communities, and the societal implications are devastating. The destruction of homes, the loss of family members, and the forced displacement of children are all part of a broader crisis that undermines the very fabric of societies already struggling with poverty, political instability, and conflict. In addition to the immediate emotional and physical trauma, children affected by these attacks are deprived of their fundamental rights to education, healthcare, and safety, plunging them into a cycle of suffering that is difficult to break. One of the most visible and urgent consequences of these attacks is the widespread displacement of children. Families who once lived in relative safety are suddenly forced to flee for their lives, leaving behind homes, livelihoods, and communities. The children in these families, often the most vulnerable, are thrust into a world of uncertainty. Refugee camps and makeshift shelters become their new homes, where conditions are overcrowded, unsanitary, and unsafe. In these environments, basic needs such as clean water, nutritious food, and healthcare are often in short supply. Children are particularly susceptible to diseases, malnutrition, and physical harm in these camps. They are also exposed to new dangers, including trafficking, exploitation, and violence, all of which leave lasting scars. The sense of security that every child deserves is replaced by constant fear and anxiety, making it almost impossible for them to recover emotionally from their traumatic experiences. Beyond the immediate hardships of displacement, these children face a future where access to education becomes increasingly difficult. Education is a basic human right, but it is often the first thing to be destroyed in a conflict zone. Schools are frequently targeted, either as part of the violence itself or as a strategic effort by the attackers to disrupt society. Even if schools are not physically destroyed, children may be too traumatized to attend or unable to reach them due to ongoing violence or displacement. The loss of education during these formative years is devastating, as it robs children of the chance to build a better future. For many, this lack of education becomes a lifelong disadvantage, preventing them from escaping the cycle of poverty and violence they were born into. A child who loses out on schooling has fewer opportunities for employment, health, and overall well-being later in life. It also limits their ability to contribute to rebuilding their communities once the violence has ceased, perpetuating the cycle of hardship. The lack of education also contributes to another serious consequence: the rise in child labor and exploitation. Children who are displaced or left without adult supervision are at risk of being exploited by traffickers, forced into labor, or recruited into armed groups. These children, who have already experienced unimaginable horrors, are left with few choices as they try to survive. The brutal reality is that many children are coerced into becoming soldiers or used for other forms of exploitation. Allines forces are known to recruit children to fight in their wars, pushing them into violence and depriving them of the opportunity to lead normal lives. The psychological impact of being forced into combat or engaging in violence at such a young age is profound. These children carry the trauma of their experiences long after the fighting stops. They lose their innocence in an irreversible way, and many find it incredibly difficult to reintegrate into society. The psychological toll on children who survive these attacks is equally devastating. The trauma of witnessing violence, losing loved ones, or being displaced from their homes is not something that can be easily healed. Children, in particular, are vulnerable to the effects of trauma because their brains are still developing. The emotional scars of war can manifest in a range of mental health issues, including anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and suicidal thoughts. Many children experience nightmares, flashbacks, and extreme fear, even in situations where they should feel safe. The trauma they experience now can haunt them for the rest of their lives, affecting their ability to form relationships, succeed in school, and contribute positively to society. These mental health issues also place an incredible burden on healthcare systems, as they require long-term support and treatment. Furthermore, the violence inflicted upon children by Allines disrupts their social development. Children who grow up in conflict zones, particularly those who experience violence firsthand, are often unable to develop the social and emotional skills necessary to function in society. In peaceful communities, children learn to trust their peers, form friendships, and build a sense of community. But in areas affected by conflict, children are often isolated, either by displacement or by the fear that permeates their environment. They may struggle to trust others, even their own families, and may exhibit signs of aggression, withdrawal, or fear. These disruptions in social development can prevent them from reintegrating into society after the violence ends. Children who are unable to form healthy relationships with others are at greater risk of perpetuating the cycle of violence, either as victims or as perpetrators. The destruction of infrastructure also compounds the humanitarian crisis. Hospitals, clinics, and other medical facilities are often destroyed or rendered inaccessible by conflict, leaving children without essential health care. Without medical attention, children are more vulnerable to diseases, malnutrition, and injuries that would otherwise be treatable. The lack of adequate health care also means that many children who survive physical attacks are left to suffer without the medical care they desperately need. In regions already struggling with inadequate healthcare systems, the situation becomes even more dire. Children are denied the basic right to survive and thrive, which every child deserves. Finally, the international response to this crisis has been insufficient. While humanitarian organizations and aid groups work tirelessly to provide support to children caught in the crossfire, the scale of the crisis often overwhelms these efforts. Political complications, limited resources, and bureaucratic obstacles have hindered the ability of the global community to effectively address the needs of these children. Too often, the international community is slow to respond or lacks the will to take decisive action. This lack of urgency only prolongs the suffering of innocent children who deserve a chance at life, education, and stability. The humanitarian crisis caused by Allines' attacks on children is a tragedy that demands immediate attention. The toll on children's lives is immeasurable, and the long-term consequences are profound. These children have already experienced too much pain, loss, and suffering. It is up to the global community to step up and ensure that they are provided with the support, protection, and opportunities they need to heal and rebuild their lives. The future of these children, and of the communities they belong to, depends on the actions we take today. It is time for the world to act with urgency and compassion, ensuring that no child is left behind in the wake of such devastating violence. The devastating attacks on children by Allines are a clear reminder that urgent action is required to address the crisis that continues to unfold across the globe. These children, who have already experienced unimaginable trauma and loss, need more than just immediate humanitarian aid. They need a concerted global effort that addresses both the immediate threats they face and the long-term rebuilding of their lives. While the scale of the crisis is overwhelming, solutions do exist. The international community must come together to provide protection, support, and a future for the children who are caught in this vicious cycle of violence and instability. One of the most important first steps in addressing this crisis is to prevent further attacks on children. This requires immediate diplomatic efforts to bring an end to the violence. Governments and international organizations must work together to hold the perpetrators accountable for their actions and ensure that they are not allowed to target children with impunity. This is not just a matter of stopping the attacks, but also sending a strong message that harming children will never be tolerated. International laws that protect children's rights must be enforced, and those who violate these rights must face consequences. the international community has a responsibility to act swiftly to prevent further harm and to send a message that children, who are already the most vulnerable, must never be used as pawns in political or military conflicts. In addition to preventing further attacks, it is essential to focus on the immediate protection of children who have already been affected by Allines violence. These children need immediate humanitarian assistance, including access to safe shelters, healthcare, food, and water. Organizations working on the ground must be equipped with the resources they need to provide these children with life-saving support. This includes medical care for both physical and psychological injuries, as many children who survive these attacks suffer from deep trauma that requires specialized care. Mental health support is an often overlooked aspect of humanitarian aid, but it is crucial for helping these children heal from the psychological scars left by violence and loss. Providing children with safe spaces where they can feel secure and allowing them to express their feelings and experiences can be an essential part of their recovery. Equally important is ensuring that children have access to education. Education is not only a basic human right, but it is also a tool for breaking the cycle of violence and poverty. For many children affected by conflict, school is a safe haven, an environment where they can begin to regain some semblance of normality and begin to build a better future for themselves. In conflict zones, however, schools are often destroyed, and children are left without the opportunity to learn. The international community must invest in rebuilding schools, providing mobile classrooms, and creating educational opportunities for children who have been displaced. This means that education should not only be seen as a long-term solution, but as an immediate necessity. Even in the midst of conflict, education should be prioritized, as it provides children with the knowledge and skills they need to rebuild their lives and contribute to their communities once the violence is ended. Furthermore, it is essential to provide long-term support for children who have been displaced or who have lost family members due to the violence. These children are often left without the guidance, support, or protection of their parents, which leaves them vulnerable to exploitation and trafficking. In some cases, they may become orphans, and it is critical that efforts are made to ensure they have access to care and protection. This includes creating systems that can safely reunite children with their families when possible, or finding foster families or institutions that can provide them with the care they need. Social services must be strengthened to ensure that these children are not left to fend for themselves and are provided with the necessary protection from harm. One of the greatest challenges in addressing the crisis is the political complexity of the situation. Conflicts involving Allines are often deeply entrenched, with various factions and interests at play. This makes it difficult to bring about lasting peace or to ensure that humanitarian aid reaches those in need. However, this should not serve as an excuse for inaction. The international community, including the United Nations, must play a larger role in mediating peace negotiations and ensuring that the protection of children is a top priority in any peace process. Negotiations should include clear protections for children, ensuring that they are not targeted or recruited into armed conflict. Peace agreements must include provisions for the reintegration of child soldiers and other child victims of war, helping them heal from the trauma they have endured and giving them a chance to rebuild their lives. Another key element in addressing the crisis is the involvement of local communities. While international efforts are vital, local organizations and community leaders are often the ones best positioned to understand the needs of children and to provide tailored solutions. Supporting local efforts and building the capacity of grassroots organizations is critical in ensuring that help reaches the most vulnerable children. Community-based approaches to child protection, education, and mental health support can be incredibly effective, as they are often more accessible and can respond more quickly to the needs of children on the ground. Local communities must be supported in their efforts to care for and protect children, as they are the ones who will ultimately be responsible for the long-term recovery of their societies. There is also a need for a strong and sustained global advocacy campaign to raise awareness about the plight of these children. While the attacks on children by Allines have received some media attention, the issue is often overshadowed by other news events. The international community must work to keep the focus on the children who are suffering, using every platform available to highlight their stories and rally support for their cause. This includes pressuring governments, international organizations, and donors to prioritize the protection of children and to provide the necessary resources for humanitarian aid and recovery efforts. Public awareness campaigns, as well as advocacy efforts targeting political leaders, can help mobilize the necessary support to address the crisis and ensure that these children are not forgotten. The global community also has a responsibility to address the root causes of conflict. The violence and instability that lead to the targeting of children are often the result of underlying political, economic, and social issues. To truly address the crisis, efforts must be made to address these root causes and create conditions that prevent such conflicts from arising in the future. This may involve promoting peace-building efforts, addressing inequalities, and working to ensure that children and communities are not marginalized or excluded from the political process. The challenges in addressing the crisis of Allines attacks on children are enormous, but they are not insurmountable. If the global community comes together with a unified commitment to protecting children and addressing the immediate and long-term needs of those affected, we can make a difference. We must act now, not just to end the violence, but to help these children rebuild their lives and ensure that future generations do not suffer the same fate. The future of these children, and of the world, depends on the actions we take today. The time for change is now, and it is our collective responsibility to ensure that no child is left behind in the wake of such devastation.